Hello, and welcome to Lab 8, the muscles of the arms and the legs. So, we started last time talking about the different arms or muscles of the trunk, head, neck. Now we're going to go into those arms and those legs specifically. So, we're going to start working our way down our arm. Here's part of that deltoid. That deltoid is that muscle that comes up over that shoulder. That deltoid works for arm abduction. So it takes your arm away from midline up over your head. I like this picture because it shows me biceps brachii. The first picture did not. So biceps brachii is that most superficial muscle on that arm, the front of that arm. Biceps brachii is going to work with flexion, and it does help to supinate the forearm. So it lets you bring your hand up towards your shoulder to bend your arm. It also works to supinate. So it takes your hand and it faces it up towards the ceiling, towards the sky, towards the front, wherever. Underneath biceps brachii is brachialis. So let's look back up to that first picture. We have that biceps brachii here. It's cut. It's cut so we can see brachialis. That brachialis is that next muscle down underneath biceps brachii. Brachialis is going to help with flexion of that elbow. Here's another view where they've taken off biceps brachii. You can see just brachialis here. Triceps. You just need to know that this big muscle here is your triceps on the back of your arm. You don't need to know that the 3 separate heads to triceps. You just need to know that that's your triceps. And then you just need to know that that triceps muscle allows for extension. So it allows you to straighten your arm back out. The next muscle we have is brachioradialis. We'll see it again when we get down to the forearm muscles, but this will let you see it from this view first. Brachioradialis starts up higher on that humerus, and it's going to come down and it's going to attach to that radius down by your carpal bones, actually, so down towards the bottom. Brachioradialis also helps with flexion at the elbow. Pronator teres. See it here, and I'll show it to you on the next slide as well. Pronator teres does what it says it does. Pronation of that forearm. So let's come back up. Here are my flexor muscles for the most part. Here's that brachioradialis traveling along this one side of the arm. Here is that pronator teres that I showed you before going through here. So these muscles in the forearm get pretty confusing. My recommendation is to, again, learn them in order, is that they travel down. I also worked on learning these by following the tendons. If you follow the tendons, it helps to show you where they go, which can help give you the name. So, pronator teres, that next muscle down is flexor carpi radialis. So, pronator teres, the next one is flexor carpi radialis. It helps to flex the wrist, and it does what is known as radial deviation. So when you take your wrist and kind of bend it sideways towards that radius, that's that radial deviation. The next muscle after flexor carpi radialis is going to be palmaris longus. Palmaris longus, this next muscle that's coming down, it's going to attach to this palmar aponeurosis, as it's called. But it attaches to this, it's longest because it has a long tendon. That's where the name comes from. Palmaris longus, long tendon. This is a very long tendon that travels all the way down to this aponeurosis. Technically, the next muscle is going to be this flexor carpi ulnaris. Flexor carpi ulnaris, that works, is going to come down this side and attach to this ulnar side. Underneath this group of muscles will come my next muscle. Flexor digitorum superficialis. So in this first picture, here, this entire muscle here is that flexor digitorum superficialis. When I say follow the tendons, this one has 4 separate tendons that are going out to your 2nd through 4th finger. That's that flexor digitorum superficialis. I say superficialis because there technically is a profundus that means deep. You don't need that one, you just need superficialis. So let's look at some of the actions of these here, of our flexors. So flexor carpi radialis, I said, does wrist flexion. It does that radial deviation, so it lets you almost abduct your wrist out towards that radius. Flexor carpi ulnaris does wrist flexion. It also does that ulnar deviation, so it lets you take your adduct your wrist or go towards that ulnar side, that pinky side. Flexor digitorum superficialis does that flexion of the middle phalanx. So that middle finger, that middle bone of your 2nd through 5th finger, that is your flexor digitorum superficialis bending that joint. Palmaris longus does that wrist flexion. Then we have this flexor retinaculum down here. That is just this tendon that is helping to hold all of these ligaments in place. Now, if we go to the back of your arm, we're in anatomical position. The back of your arm is going to be the side that, if you had a watch on, the face of your watch would be on. So, for my extensors, again, sometimes just learning them in order. Extensor carpi ulnaris. That is this muscle coming down to that ulnar side. Extensor digitorum. That extensor digitorum is this muscle coming down, and then it's going to break off into those 4 tendons that are going to go to your 2nd through 4th or 5th finger, and it helps you to extend your fingers. Extensor carpi, there it is, extensor carpi radialis longus. Extensor carpi radialis, it has a very long tendon to it. That is where that longus comes in. Extensor carpi radialis longus. If we have a longus, we have a brevis, but you don't need to know it. And then we have our extensor retinaculum here. So if I come down here, my extensor carpi radialis longus does wrist extension. The flexors did the wrist flexion. The extensors do the wrist flexion. Radialis side does the radial deviation. That extensor carpi ulnaris does that ulnar deviation. Extensor digitorum, it allows you to extend your fingers. Extends phalanges. And that extensor retinaculum just keeps those extensor tendons in place. That flexor retinaculum, I said, kept that flexor tendons in place. Down to the leg. So we have this muscle that travels along, crosses over the leg. That muscle that crosses over the leg is known as sartorius. So it goes from one side all the way down to the other side. You can see tensor fascia lata. That tensor fascia lata is this muscle here that actually attaches into that iliotibial tract, or also known as the IT band, as people tend to know it as. Our 4 muscles that make up our quadriceps. One of these is cut. We have rectus femoris. That is this one that's cut here. It technically continues down there. Rectus means straight, so those muscles are running in a nice straight line. The next one, vastus medialis. That is this muscle on the medial side of the leg. Vastus lateralis over here on this outside of this leg here. Then directly underneath rectus femoris is where we have vastus intermedius. So this one through here underneath rectus femoris. Those are the 4 muscles that make up your quadricep muscles. Then again, it's not on the sheet, but just as that reminder, we have that quadriceps tendon, that patellar ligament underneath the patella. We can see some of the adductors. The adductors are on the inside of your leg. So gracilis is the muscle that is traveling along the medial side of your leg. It is that most medial muscle here. Gracilis is the most commonly transplanted muscle because it's a really weak adductor, bringing your leg back towards that middle. So we use that muscle sometimes other places in the forearm when it might be needed. We have adductor longus. We can see part of that adductor longus here, coming in through here. So here, they cut adductor longus so when I just pointed out here, they cut this one here so you can see the other muscles that lie in this area. We have adductor magnus, which is a very, very large, thick muscle that sits kind of all through here, adductor magnus. Again, you can see that gracilis, this muscle that travels along the medial side of the leg. Sorry, I was making sure I didn't miss anything. Let's look at what these muscles do now. Because I went through those 4 quadricep muscles. That rectus femoris is that most superficial down the front of the leg. That's that leg extension. Vastus medialis, vastus lateralis, and vastus intermedius. They all extend the knee joint. Those are our quadricep muscles. That sartorius crosses your legs. The actual actions is flexes, abducts, and medially rotates the thigh. Those are the 3 motions that your leg goes in when you go to cross your legs. Now we have our adductors. So gracilis. Gracilis is going to help cross your legs. It's also that weak adductor. We have adductor longus, which adducts the thigh, and that adductor magnus, that very large muscle that adducts, flexes, and medially rotates the thigh. So it's also helping to cross your legs as well because it's such a large muscle in the middle of your leg? Our gluteal muscles. So we have gluteus maximus. That is that most superficial muscle of your glutes. It is the largest muscle in the body. It is huge. Gluteus medius up here comes in on that side. So gluteus maximus is going to extend and laterally rotate your hip joint. So it lets your leg go backwards. It also laterally rotates. So it helps you take your toes and point them towards the outside. Gluteus medius abducts and medially rotates. So it lets you take if you point your toes towards each other, kind of like pigeon-toed, if you've ever heard that term, and you take a step sideways, you're using your gluteus medius. That's actually a really good exercise to train that gluteus medius. So let's go down to the back of the leg. There's a group of muscles that make up your hamstrings now. Your hamstrings are made up of the biceps femoris. This one is on that lateral side. We have semitendinosus. It is labeled as that tendinosus because it is that most superficial. Tendinosus, and then what sits underneath tendinosus is semimembranosus. That semimembranosus, I get a different color here, is through here. You can see it. You can see semimembranosus back here as well. These are the three muscles that are going to make up those hamstrings. So semimembranosus and semitendinosus are on the medial side. Biceps femoris is on that lateral side of that leg as a way to try to help differentiate between the two. So here's where they kind of isolate out some muscles. You can see that gracilis, that adductor longus, that adductor magnus. Here's those different quadriceps muscles all by themselves. So you see that rectus femoris, vastus lateralis. You see vastus medialis and sartorius on the same picture, and then vastus medialis by itself. Here you see that biceps femoris and that semitendinosus. Here you get that semimembranosus. This is the other head of that biceps femoris. Bi means two, so there's technically two heads to it. You just need to know that that's biceps femoris. You don't need to know that it's long head, short head. Biceps femoris on its own is all you need to know here. So biceps femoris. Here. Biceps femoris is going to extend the thigh at the hip joint. That semimembranosus, semitendinosus. Semimembranosus flexes the knee and extends the hip at the hip joint. So it lets you bend your knee and extend your leg back behind you. And then semitendinosus also helps to let you extend thigh at the hip joint. So take your leg back behind you. I had pointed out that tensor fascia lata muscle that was sitting up here that I am coloring in blue, that tensor fascia lata. That is on this chart down here. Flexes and abducts the hip joint. So it helps you bend your knee, bend your hip up, but then it abducts, so it lets you take your leg out to the side. Let's look at the muscles of the lower leg. So on the front of the leg, we have tibialis anterior. Tibialis anterior, either this muscle that you see here in the front, or this muscle here that's tendon that comes down. That's our tibialis anterior. It's going to help to dorsiflex your leg. So that tibialis anterior, dorsiflex is your ankle. Technically, that talocrural joint, your ankle. The next muscle, one that people are going to mix up, always happens. I'm hoping someday it doesn't. Extensor digitorum longus. Your arm has extensor digitorum. Your leg has extensor digitorum longus. Longus is in the leg. So that extensor digitorum longus is the next one. And if you follow, it comes out to the different toes, the second through fifth toe, to help extend the toes. You can see that muscle coming down here, and then it's going to come out to those toes. And it does exactly what it says. Extensor digitorum longus extends the second through fifth metatarsal. Extensor digitorum longus. Then if we go to the outside of the leg, we have fibularis longus. That fibularis longus is this muscle here that comes down. So this muscle through here is that fibularis longus. You can see it from this outside here as well, in this tendon that just comes down. Fibularis longus works to plantar flex the foot, so point your toes towards the ground. Then we have the muscles on the back of the leg. You can see it from the side. We have gastrocnemius. That is the most superficial muscle on the back of the leg here. This is the muscle that actually makes up the shape of the back of your calf. Is that gastrocnemius? The muscle underneath that is soleus. Soleus is just the one deep to gastrocnemius. Both of those muscles, gastrocnemius and soleus, do that plantar flexion. Point your toes toward the ground, stand up on your toes. So if I move, here's that gastrocnemius, here's that soleus that they cut. Underneath soleus is tibialis posterior. That is this muscle right here that you can see from this view. Tibialis posterior also helps with that plantar flexion, pointing your toes down towards the ground. So here we've got everything separated out, that tibialis anterior, extensor digitorum longus that goes out to the toes. Here's fibularis longus. Here's those gastrocnemius. Here's that soleus. Somebody decided soleus looked like a fish. Soleus in Latin means fish. Here's tibialis posterior. So that tibialis posterior does that plantar flexion. Now here is everything on the models. So we have biceps brachii, brachialis underneath. You see triceps brachii. You can see deltoid across the top. Here's that subscapularis, that teres major just from the last lab. Here's that deltoid, part of that trapezius, teres major, triceps, brachialis, biceps brachii. You see that infraspinatus from here. That brachioradialis, extensor carpi radialis longus, pronator teres, flexor carpi radialis, palmaris longus, flexor digitorum superficialis, flexor carpi ulnaris. Flexor carpi radialis, you can see here. This is just showing once they take off all those layers, you can see part of that palmaris longus tendon there they left. The back of the arm, here's that brachioradialis again. Then we have extensor carpi ulnaris, extensor digitorum, extensor carpi radialis longus. There it is. I was looking for that one. Extensor carpi radialis longus there. We've got some of the tendons. Most of these just kind of show what's in the hand. You don't necessarily need to know those. And then here's the thigh. So here's sartorius, tensor fasciolata, rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, gracilis, adductor longus. You can even see iliopsoas coming down. So here they've taken off some of the muscles. So now you can see vastus intermedius. You still got vastus medialis, vastus lateralis, tensor fasciolata, adductor longus, gracilis. The back of the leg, we've got gluteus medius, gluteus maximus, gluteus medius. There we go. Semitendinosus, semimembranosus. You can still see gracilis, biceps femoris, vastus lateralis. You can see from the outside. Here's that semimembranosus. You can still see vastus lateralis, biceps femoris, gluteus maximus that's been cut. There's more views, vastus lateralis, medius, rectus femoris, tensor fasciolata, adductor longus, sartorius. You can see that iliopsoas coming through. So here's that iliopsoas, vastus intermedius, vastus lateralis, vastus medius, adductor longus, gluteus maximus, adductor magnus, gracilis, semitendinosus, biceps femoris, semimembranosus, gluteus medius. So you can see all of these different muscles. I can keep going, get tibialis anterior, get fibularis longus, extensor digitorum, longus, gastrocnemius. You can see part of soleus here. Gastrocnemius, soleus, tibialis anterior, gastrocnemius, soleus, fibularis longus, tibialis anterior, extensor digitorum, longus, leg. Then from the back, you can see these. Fibularis longus. Here's where we get into tibialis posterior. We have to take away several layers of the muscle to get to it. Got fibularis longus. So there's lots of models, pictures of all of these. Different models, same pictures. I'm going to go through the models or the pictures, or the models are what I'm going to use to test you on. So keep that in mind. If you have questions, please let me know. Otherwise, thank you for listening. Bye.